The sun hung low over the desert, casting a golden glow across the endless sands where cacti stood like silent sentinels. A small town, barely more than a cluster of weathered wooden buildings, stirred with whispers of a stranger's arrival. She stepped off the stagecoach, her white lace dress shimmering like a mirage, her veil fluttering in the dry wind. Her name was Clara, though no one here knew it yet. Her eyes, sharp and searching, scanned the dusty street for a man she hadn't seen in years. A man they called the Apache Man. Once, he'd been Elias, her love, a rancher's son with dreams as big as the sky. But war and time had changed him, or so the stories went. They said he rode with outlaws now, a shadow moving through the canyons, half Apache by upbringing, wholly untamed. Clara's heart pounded as she clutched the locket at her throat, its worn surface hiding a faded photograph of a younger Elias. "Do you recognize me, Apache Man?" she whispered to herself, practicing the words she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. She'd been his love, his promise, before the world tore them apart. Years ago, in a meadow under starlight, they'd sworn to find each other again. Now, she was here, a bride in a town that didn't know her, chasing a ghost. The townsfolk watched her, curious and wary, as she walked toward the saloon where Elias was said to linger. Her dress dragged through the dust, but she held her head high, her beauty a quiet defiance against the harshness of this place. She'd heard a tale as of his scars, his silence, his life among the Apache after his family's ranch burned. Could he still be the man she loved, or had the desert claimed him, as it had so many others? The saloon doors creaked as she pushed them open, and the chatter inside fell silent. Eyes turned to her, but she sought only one pair, dark, haunted, and familiar. Somewhere in this room, she felt him, and her voice trembled as she prepared to speak the words that might shatter or save them both. The saloon was a haze of smoke and shadow, the air thick with the scent of whiskey and sweat. Clara stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the dying light, a vision that seemed to belong to another world. Men at the bar froze, cards paused mid-deal, as her gaze swept the room. She felt their stares, some leering, some puzzled, but she cared only for Elias. At a corner table, half hidden by a tattered curtain, a man sat alone, his hat pulled low. His hands, rough and scarred, rested on a glass of untouched liquor. Her breath caught. Was it him? The years had carved lines into her memory, but the slope of his shoulders, the way he held himself, felt like a song she'd never forgotten. She stepped forward, her boots soft on the creaking floorboards, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "Do you recognize me, Apache Man?" she said, her voice clear despite the tremor in her chest. The man didn't move, but his fingers tightened around the glass. Slowly, he lifted his head, and she saw his eyes dark, like the night they danced under, but now guarded, wary. "I was your love," she continued, her words a fragile bridge across the years. "Clara," she added, softer, as if the name might unlock something in him. The room stirred, whispers rippling like wind through grass. The Apache Man, they called him, a name born of his time with the tribe, his survival in a world that broke most men. He'd been Elias once, her Elias, who'd carved their initials into an oak tree and promised her forever. But then the war came, and raiders burned his family's land. He'd vanished, leaving her with only a locket and a vow. Now, here he was, or so she hoped. His silence stretched, heavy as the desert heat. "You're a long way from home, lady," he said at last, his voice low, rough like gravel. It wasn't a denial, but it wasn't a welcome either. Clara's heart sank, but she stepped closer, her veil catching the dim light. She wouldn't let him slip away again, not without a fight. The past was a wound, but she believed it could heal if he'd only look at her, really look, and see the girl he'd loved. Clara's eyes held his, searching for a flicker of recognition, but Elias, or the man they called the Apache Man, kept his gaze steady, unyielding. The saloon's murmurs grew louder, a mix of curiosity and suspicion, as if her presence threatened some unspoken balance. She didn't care. She'd crossed half the territory to find him, driven by a letter she'd received months ago, scrawled in a hand she barely recognized. It had said only, "I'm alive, come to Redstone. No signature, but she knew it was him. She'd sold her mother's ring to pay for the journey, leaving behind a life of comfort for this dust-choked town. Now, standing before him, she felt the weight of those miles. "Elias," she said, dropping the Apache Man title, her voice a plea. "It's me, Clara." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he'd stand, embrace her, pull her into the past where they belonged. But he leaned back, his chair creaking, and said, "You got the wrong man." The words cut deeper than she'd expected, but she saw the lie in his eyes, the way they flickered away from hers. He was hiding a maybe from her, maybe from himself. She reached for the locket, unclasping it with trembling fingers, and held it out. Inside was the photograph, faded but clear. Two young faces, hers and his, smiling under that oak tree. "Look at this," she urged, stepping closer. "Tell me you don't remember." He didn't take it, but his eyes lingered on the locket, and she saw something shift in him, a crack in the wall he'd built. Around them, the saloon's patrons watched, some amused, others uneasy. A man at the bar muttered something about trouble, but Clara ignored him. She'd heard the stories of Elias's new life, how he'd learned the Apache ways, how he'd fought off raiders, how he'd become a legend and a curse. But she didn't care about the Apache Man. She wanted Elias, the boy who'd kissed her under the stars. "I waited," she said, her voice breaking. "I waited years, Elias. Don't turn me away now." His hand twitched, as if to reach for her, but then he stood abruptly, the chair scraping loud against the floor. "Leave," he said, and walked toward the back door, leaving her standing there, the locket heavy in her hand. The saloon doors swung shut behind Elias, and Clara felt the air leave her lungs. The room buzzed with whispers, but they faded into a dull roar as she stared at the empty space where he'd been. She wanted to run after him, to demand answers, but her legs felt rooted to the floor. The locket burned in her palm, a reminder of the promises they'd made. She hadn't come this far to be dismissed. Tucking the locket into her dress, she straightened her spine and followed him, ignoring the bartender's warning glance. Outside, the night was cool, the stars sharp against the black sky, just like the nights they had shared long ago. Elias stood by a hitching post, his back to her, his silhouette stark against the moonlit desert. "Elias," she called, her voice softer now, but firm. He didn't turn, but his shoulders tensed. "Why are you here, Clara?" he asked, his tone heavy with something she couldn't name, a regret, maybe, or fear. "I got your letter," she said, stepping closer. "You told me to come." He spun then, his eyes narrowing. "I never sent a letter." Her heart stuttered. If not him, then who? But she pushed the doubt aside. "Then why are you running from me?" she pressed. "I know it's you. I'd know you anywhere." He laughed, a bitter sound that didn't suit the man she remembered. "You don't know me, Clara." "Not anymore." But she saw the pain in his eyes, the weight of years spent surviving. She stepped closer, close enough to smell the leather and dust on him. "I know you loved me once," she said. "I know you carved our names in that tree. I know you're still in there, Elias, no matter what they called you now." He looked away, toward the horizon, where the desert stretched endless and unforgiving. "The man you loved died when the ranch burned," he said. "I'm not him." But she wasn't fooled. She reached out, her hand brushing his arm, and he flinched but didn't pull away. "Then why can't you look at me?" she whispered. "Why can't you say you don't remember?" The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. Somewhere in this moment, Clara knew, was the truth about him, about her, about the letter that had brought her here. She wouldn't leave until she found it. The desert night pressed close, its chill seeping through Clara's lace dress as she stood facing Elias. His silence was a wall, but she'd always been stubborn, unwilling to let go of what mattered. "If you didn't send the letter," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest, "then someone wanted me here. Someone who knows us, knows what we were." Elias's eyes flickered, a storm brewing behind them. "You shouldn't have come," he said, but there was no venom in it, only a quiet resignation. He turned to walk away again, his boots crunching on the gravel, but Clara grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into the worn leather of his jacket. "Don't," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare walk away from me again." He froze, and for the first time, She saw the man she'd known invulnerable, caught between who he was and who he'd become. "Clara," he said, her name a whisper, like a prayer he hadn't meant to speak. "You don't understand what you're walking into." She stepped closer, refusing to let the distance grow. "Then tell me," she said. "Tell me what happened to you. Tell me why you're hiding." His gaze dropped to the ground, and she saw the scars on his hands, the marks of a life she hadn't shared. "After the fire," he began, his voice low, "I had nothing. The Apache took me in, taught me to survive. But surviving ain't living, Clara. I did things a broken bar, things I can't take back." She waited, letting his words settle, heavy as the dust around them. "I don't care," she said finally. "I came for you, Elias, not some legend. I came because I promised I would." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the years fell away. She saw the boy who'd laughed with her, who dreamed of a future they'd build together. But then his expression hardened. "There's trouble coming," he said. "Men are after me, bad men. If you stay, you'll get caught in it." Clara's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid," she said, though her hands trembled. "I lost you once. I won't lose you again." Somewhere in the distance, hoofbeats echoed, faint but growing louder. Elias tensed, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "You don't know what you're saying," he warned, but Clara only smiled, her resolve unshaken. She'd find the truth, no matter the cost. 6. The hoofbeats grew louder, a rhythmic thunder that seemed to shake the very stars. Elias's hand rested on his revolver, his eyes scanning the dark horizon. Clara felt a chill that wasn't from the night air. "Who's coming?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. Elias didn't answer right away, his attention fixed on the shadows beyond the town. "Men who want blood," he said finally, his tone flat but heavy with meaning. "Men I crossed when I left the outlaw trail." Clara's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of his life she'd missed. The stories she'd heard painted him as a renegade, a man who'd turned against his own kind to protect the Apache, who'd betrayed outlaws to save innocents. But at what cost? She wanted to ask, to demand every detail, but the urgency in his stance silenced her. "Go back inside," he said, his voice a low growl. "Now." But Clara shook her head, her veil catching the moonlight. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her words fierce. "Not again." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, she thought he'd argue, but then he sighed, a sound heavy with surrender. "Stay close, then," he said, pulling her behind a stack of barrels near the saloon. The hoofbeats stopped, replaced by the creak of leather and the murmur of voices. 3 riders dismounted, their silhouettes dark against the moonlit street. Clara glimpsed the glint of guns, the hard lines of their faces. "Elias," one called, his voice rough as broken glass. "We know you're here." Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Clara's heart pounded as she whispered, "What do they want?" He glanced at her, his eyes dark with secrets. "Something I took," he said. "Something they'll kill for." She wanted to ask more, but the leader of the riders stepped forward, his boots heavy on the dirt. "You can't run forever, Apache Man," he shouted. Clara felt Elias tense beside her, his hand steady on his gun. She realized then that the letter, the reunion, everything up it was all tangled in something bigger, something dangerous. But she didn't care. She'd come for him, and she'd stay, even if it meant facing the storm. "Elias," she whispered, her hand finding his. "Whatever it is, we face it together." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a spark of the man she'd loved, ready to fight for her as she would for him. 7. The riders' shadows stretched long across the street, their voices carrying a menace that made Clara's skin prickle. Elias crouched beside her, his breath steady but his eyes sharp, tracking every movement. "Stay down," he whispered, his voice a low command. Clara nodded, her hand still gripping his, her heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. The leader of the riders, a tall man with a scar slicing through his brow, stepped closer, his spurs jangling. "You stole from us, Elias," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can hide behind that Apache name?" Clara's mind spun a stole what? She glanced at Elias, but his face was unreadable, a mask carved from years of survival. "I took what was owed," Elias called back, his voice steady but cold. "You want it? Come and get it." The words hung in the air, a challenge that silenced the night. The other two riders fanned out, their hands hovering over their guns. Clara's breath hitched as she realized the danger they were in, but she also saw the resolve in Elias's eyes. The same fire she'd seen when he'd stood up to his father to court her years ago. "What did you take?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Elias's gaze flicked to her, and for a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "A map," he said finally, his voice low. "To a mine. Gold they stole from the Apache." Clara's eyes widened. A map, that's what this was about? A fortune hidden in the desert, and Elias had taken it, not for himself, but to right a wrong. She felt a surge of pride, but also fear. These men wouldn't stop until they had Ida or him. The leader laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the empty street. "You and your noble causes," he sneered. "Hand it over, or we burn this town to the ground." Clara's grip on Elias tightened. She could feel the weight of his choice, the burden of the man he'd become. "You don't have to do this alone," she said, her voice fierce. "I'm here." He looked at her, and something softened in his eyes, a flicker of the love they'd shared. Before he could respond, a shot rang out, splintering the barrel above them. Elias pulled her down, his body shielding hers as chaos erupted. The fight was coming, and Clara knew, whatever happened, she'd stand by him, just as she'd promised all those years ago. 8. Dust exploded around them as another shot tore through the night, the sharp crack of gunfire splitting the silence. Elias pressed Clara against the barrels, his body a shield as he drew his revolver with a practiced ease. "Stay low," he hissed, his eyes scanning the street where the riders now took cover behind a wagon. Clara's heart thundered, but she nodded, her resolve unbroken. She wasn't the girl who'd waited passively back then. She was here, in this moment, ready to fight for the man she loved. The leader shouted again, his voice taunting. "You can't protect her, Elias. Give us the map, and maybe we let her walk away." Clara felt Elias tense, his grip on the gun tightening. "They don't know you," he muttered, almost to himself. "They don't know what you're capable of." She met his gaze, a silent vow passing between them. She wasn't helpless, and she'd prove it. Reaching into her dress, she pulled a small derringer from a hidden pocket, its weight familiar from the long journey. Elias's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise breaking through his stoic mask. "You came prepared," he said, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Clara nodded, her own smile fierce. "Always." The riders fired again, bullets chewing through wood and sending splinters flying. Elias returned fire, his shots precise, forcing the men to duck. Clara peered over the barrels, her derringer steady in her hand. She saw the leader crouch behind the wagon, reloading, and took aim. Her shot grazed his arm, and he cursed, stumbling back. Elias glanced at her, pride flashing in his eyes. "Good shot," he said, before firing again. The fight was chaos, but in it, Clara felt alive, connected to Elias in a way she hadn't been in years. They moved together, covering each other, their past and present merging in the heat of battle. The riders were faltering, but Clara knew this wasn't the end. The map, the gold, the secrets Elias carried, they'd draw more trouble. But as she fought beside him, she felt the truth settle in her bones. She'd found him, her Apache man, her Elias, and no matter what came next, they'd face it together. The gunfire faded, the riders retreating into the dark, but Clara and Elias remained, their hands clasped, their love a fire that the desert couldn't quench.